Welcome back to the third hour of music for grown-ups with me, Dave Roberts. On this side of the desk, on the other side of the desk, Mr. Derek Shelmerdine and Run Rudolph Run. Gosh, you got to play something by Chuck around the Christmas time, haven't you, Derek?
Absolutely. A little bit of Chuckian festive spirit there.
Yeah.
I mean, that was actually released in America in 58. Didn't trouble the charts at all. But he did manage to get a UK hit with it in 1963. It managed to get to number 36. And there's a definite link between Chuck and the first guys we're going to talk about, and that's a Beatles crimble, as we say up in Liverpool. And John Lennon famously said in the early 70s, he was on a TV show with Chuck Berry, and he famously said that if you had to give rock and roll another name, you could call it Chuck Berry. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. But the Beatles are interesting. I mean, they never had a specific Christmas song, but they've got a lot of association with Christmas. They had 4 Christmas number ones. I mean, that's a colossal number. That was 63, I Want to Hold Your Hand, 64, I Feel Fine, 65, Day Trip, We Can Work It Out, double A, and 67, they missed 66, 67, Hello Goodbye. And the reason they missed 66 was Yellow Submarine and Eleanor Rigby, another double A. That actually entered the charts on the 11th of August, and they didn't release another single that particular year, and that actually represented the last of their run of 11 UK consecutive number ones, and that was when they were recording Pepper. And the first couple of songs that were destined for the Pepper album were Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane. And the record company was desperate to get a single out. So that came out at the early part of 67. And it only made number 2. Oh. So it was quite weird, really, when you look at the whole thing. Considering that, that summer, 67, Pepper was arguably, the biggest album they ever did, and it was continuously chopped best albums of all time for decades since. And they had Flexi Club sing. If you were lucky enough to be in the Beatles fan club, or smart enough at the time to be in the Beatles fan club, you'd receive a Flexi single every year from 63 to 69. They did a couple of Christmas shows down in London in 63 and 64, and they came close to a Christmas song with something they called Crimble Melody. That went out on BBC Saturday Club. That was an oasis of pop music in a world of Mantovani at the time, and that went down on the 21st of December 1963. But by Christmas 63 they were sweeping all before them. That was when they released I Want to Hold Your Hand, and in the UK it was the first ever single to have 1 million advance orders, and it was number 1 for 5 weeks. Released in America as their first single on Columbia Records. It was the song that actually broke them, started the British invasion. They appeared famously on the Ed Sullivan Show on the 9th of February 64, seen by 73 million people. And that was when the whole British invasion started, when the poor old American rock and roll bands couldn't get a look in for certainly the beginning, the Mersey Beat bands, and then lots of British artists for a couple of years, and that all sort of faded away in 65, 66. But after the Beatles went their separate ways, they all decided individually to put out Christmas records. Paul McCartney had one in 79, Wonderful Christmas Time. George Harrison, Ding Dong, 1974, although that was probably more of a New Year song. And Ringo decided in 1999, well, he'd go the whole hog. He decided to release a whole album of Christmas songs, and he called the album I Wanna Be Santa Claus, and it included, of course, a cover of White Christmas, as you'd expect. Now, the one we're really going to look at is John and Yoko and the Plastic Ono Band with Happy Christmas, War is Over. And that's very much the Vietnam War that they're talking about. And it all sort of kicked off a couple of years before. John and Yoko decided to launch an international peace campaign with posters everywhere saying, war is over if you want it. And they had a Peace for Christmas benefit concert at the Lyceum in London. It was the British debut of the Plastic Ono Band. It was the first time that George and John had shared a stage since 1966. This is 1969. Now, the band included George Harrison, Clapton, Klaus Voormann, Billy Preston, Delaney and Bonnie. And Keith Moon was obviously in the audience. He decided to pop up and join them on stage as only Keith Moon could. And he gave the one of the floor toms a very good singing to that particular evening. They only played two very, 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 very extended versions of two songs, Cold Turkey and Don't Worry Kyoko. And reading an interview that one of the drummers that night gave, he said it went on so long that there were two drummers that we decided that we'd speed up, and they just kept speeding up until it became impossible to play, and the song finally came to an end. But if you want to check that out, but not the full versions, obviously, because that would take a sort of quadruple album, check out John Lennon's Sometime in New York City. The live album there has those two tracks, and it also has the time that John and Yoko joined Frank Zappa on stage, and that's another interesting story in itself. Well, on the 1st of December 71, they released the single Happy Christmas, War is Over in America. It wasn't released in the UK for the year for contractual reasons over the publishing rights. But it wasn't a hit in America when it was released. In fact, Happy Christmas, War is Over has never graced the Billboard charts. Written by John and Yoko and produced by John and Yoko and Phil Spector. To put it into context, it was an anti-Vietnam War song. That's the war that they hoped would be over. And at the time, late 69, the American administration army was still talking up the fact that America was going to win the war. But the North Vietnamese launched their famous Tet Offensive, was when they attacked simultaneously dozens of targets in South Vietnam. It took 3 months to quell some of it, but the attacks were beaten back. But that was the turning point in the war, and the Paris peace talks started on the 10th of May 68, so 6 months after the Tet Offensive was started, and the Paris Peace Accords weren't actually signed until January 1973. So this song fell quite nicely in the middle of all that. Now, John Lennon and Phil Spector claimed the melody is based on one of Spector's earlier songs, I Love How You Love Me, with the Paris Sisters. But it's also attributed very much to the traditional English ballad Skew Ball that's been re-recorded a number of times as Stew Ball. And Peter, Paul and Mary have a very famous version. Released in the UK, in 72, it did get to number 4. And it got to 48 in 75, 2 in 80, 28 in 81 and 56 in 82, and has been released a bunch more times. But it never did make it in America. But it's a good time, I think, to have a listen to. Happy Christmas. War's over.
Yeah, good old round of applause. Happy Christmas. War is over.
Right.
Happy Christmas, everyone. Yeah.
Everybody having a good time, as you should at Christmas. I love Christmas. I'm one of these people who absolutely loves Christmas, always have done, hopefully always will do.
Yep.
And another colossal at Christmas is Elvis Presley. I mean, the guy's had 2 Christmas number ones, Now or Never in 60 and Return to Sender in 62. But he's had, in his lifetime, hits every year except 1959 when he was in the army, and a couple of years in the mid-late 70s, 67, 68, when he was going through the whole matinee idol era, and the only songs he was releasing were actually from movies, courtesy of The Colonel. But I mean, it all started for Elvis in 56 with Heartbreak Hotel, made number 2 in the UK, had 5 more hits in 56 before his first Christmas hit, obviously the Christmas of 56, with Love Me Tender from his first movie of the same name. And then 57, a proper Christmas song, Santa, Bring My Baby Back to Me. And that was taken from Elvis's Christmas album. So coming back to the conversation we were having earlier, sometimes you do find singles on albums, but this one was specifically a Christmas album. And then the 24th of March 1958, the Army greeted 533-10761, Elvis Presley, and he was inducted into the US Army. Now, his 4th movie, King Creole was released in the middle of 58, and that gave him a title track, gave him a Christmas hit in 58. Now, in 59, in the UK, released 3 singles in the first half of the year, but nothing in the second half. So obviously, that's the reason there for no Christmas hit. Discharged from the army in March 1960, and in November 60, his 5th movie was released in America. And from that point until 1969, he released more or less 3 movies every year, right across the decade. I mean, a couple of years, or 1 year, there was only 2, but by and large, it was 3 movies a year. But the Christmas hits carried on nicely in the 60s. He had a Christmas #1 with It's Now or Never, #1 for 8 weeks. 61, his latest Flame, #1 for 4 weeks. Returned to sender in 62, and that was from a movie. That was from his 11th movie, Girls, Girls, Girls. That was #1 for 3 weeks. And then it all gets a bit complicated. 63 was Kiss Me Quick. Now, that was from an album called Pot Luck, released in 62. And that had been Elvis's last album of rock material for 7 years until the end of the decade. In 1964, he had a hit with Blue Christmas, and that was from Elvis's 1957 Christmas album. And in 65 he had a hit with Tell Me Why. Now that was actually recorded in 1957 but not actually released then. He did have a hit, I Wish Every Day Was Like Christmas, in 66, and then nothing in 67, 68, and it was at the end of 68, 3rd of December, so it's all nice and Christmassy. That was his famous TV comeback special with Scotty Moore and drummer DJ Fontana, and it was the July of 69 he started at the Las Vegas International Hotel, his first of his residencies at Las Vegas. That one lasted 5 weeks, and it was his first concert performance. The first one was 31st July, and that was the first concert performance he'd done for over 7 years. And his last movie came out in the November of 69, 31st and last, Change of Habit, where he falls in love with a nun, which is interesting plotline. Yeah. Interesting plotline. But he still had some more classic hits. 69, Suspicious Minds. In 71, he had 2 on the charts. He had Jailhouse Rock back in the charts from his 3rd movie. That was 57. 57 was a good year for Elvis Christmas music. But he also had a hit with I Just Can't Help Believing, then Always on My Mind. 73 had one with a track called Raised on Rock, and that was from the famous recordings he did at the Stax studios. They're well worth checking out. 76, the last Christmas actually while he was still alive, Suspicion, and he died on the 16th of August 1977. But the one we're going to listen to is actually the first one after his death, and it's Elvis's classic version of My Way, which was actually a French song that started life as Comme d'habitude. Paul Anka wrote the English version. Sinatra had a big hit within 1969. Now this was actually a live recording from shortly before Elvis died, and this is Elvis with My Way.
Oh, indeed. Elvis Presley doing it his way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Not for me.
No, we just have an interesting discussion. Yeah, because I'm a big Elvis fan,
and I'm not. No, I like his early stuff, but that kind of cabaret kind of style there, you know.
Oh, I loved all that.
Just doesn't. Not for me at all.
The musicians who worked with.
Oh, the musicians were great, but to me it was the musicians that were backing him up and propping him up and keeping him going. I just don't think there was anything left in him at all.
Yeah, it's like you were saying earlier. I think with different bands, some people really rate, and other people can't see what's there. I think it all just comes down to taste and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I mean, you know, if you like it, then you like it, and that's it. Yeah. There's no point in going on any further, is there? Yeah. If you like it, if it does it for you, then great.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, he had a phenomenal career with 3 totally different elements: the 50s rocker, the 60s matinee idol, and the 70s ultimate cabaret act. Yeah. And you know, you look at his track record; it's just unreal.
Yeah. Elvis Presley.
Yeah. I went to Graceland some years ago. Absolutely. I mean, you haven't got to be a great fan to just realised just what the guy was all about. I mean, there's a massive room just full of gold, silver, platinum discs from all over the world.
Yeah.
Actually awesome.
Yeah. Good.
And somewhere he's living on the moon was the last I heard. In fact, Kirsty McCall saw him down at the there's a fellow that looks like Elvis down our chip shop.
Yeah.
So he's everywhere.
He is indeed.
Omnipresent.
Yes.
Well, a quick look at some of the things that happened on this very day, the 20th of December. And we mentioned the Vietnam War earlier, and on the 20th of December 1967, Joan Baez actually was sentenced to 45 days jail time for a demonstration she was at the Oakland Induction Centre, Army Induction Centre, the previous October. And it was her husband, David Harris, who also spent time in prison. He formed a group called the Resistance, and they were very active protesters against the war. And that was formed around the time that Martin Luther King Jr. made his famous Beyond Vietnam speech on the 4th of April. And Muhammad Ali was arrested, of course, for refusing to be drafted. Yeah. There is a famous quote attributed to Ali associated with that. But I'd like to stay out of prison, so I will give you that particular quote. Now, the protests, I mean, 67 was a really big year for protests. And one of the fun ones, well, it wasn't actually a fun one, but the objective, it was protesting at the Pentagon army establishment on the 21st of October. And one of the objectives was to levitate the building off the ground. Now, they people like Jerry Rubin, Abby Hoffman were there, and everybody was chanting. Peter, Paul and Mary were there. Joan Baez was obviously there. The record doesn't show whether or not they actually did get how high they got the building off the ground, but that was certainly the key objective. But again, to put it into context, it was just after that. It was December 67. It was the end of January 68 when I mentioned earlier the Tet Offensive, which was the major attack from it wasn't technically from the north, it was mostly South Vietnamese guerrillas who simultaneously set about dozens of objectives in the south. It was beaten back, but it was very much the turning point of the war. Now we've got a happy birthday. It's always good to have a happy birthday near Christmas. And this one's Terry Dean. Now, Terry, born Terence Williams, actually born in the Elephant and Castle. I think that's one of the real fun names. If you've got to have a dress in London, you know, I live at the Elephant and Castle. I always think sounds like a great place to live. But he was one of the seminal British rock and roll singers in the mid-late 50s. Regular appearances on things like the 6-5 Special, which was the first British pop music show, basically. He had a handful of hit singles in the late 50s. He married a lady called Edna Savage, another pop singer, in 58, but sadly that didn't work out. And in the summer of 58, he was conscripted into the British Army in much the same way Elvis had been, in a blaze of publicity. Sadly for Mr. Dean, it didn't quite work out, and he was actually discharged through psychological ill health shortly afterwards, and he got done for drunk and disorderly and all kinds of things. And sadly, Terry Dean's career sort of spiraled away towards the end of the 1950s. But he's one of these more gentler rock and rollers. I think White Sports Coat and a Pink Carnation was one of the covers he did.
Oh, just like your dress now, Derek.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All ready for Christmas parties. Oh, I love Christmas parties. If anybody wants to invite me to one. 20th of December 1975. Unbeknown to Cat Stevens or anybody else in the Hammersmith Odeon that night, that was Cat Stevens' last ever concert in the UK. In 676, he had a near-death experience when he nearly drowned while he was swimming off Malibu in California. And apparently he called out to God for help, and the tide turned and he swam back to shore. A cynic might say he was in a riptide, but certainly it worked for Cat Stevens. And his experience converted him to Islam, and essentially turned his back on the record industry. It started out, his first hit in '66 with "I Love My Dog," a sentiment shared by a lot of people, I think. In '68, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis, TB, and by the time he returned in 1970, he come back with a new manager and a new record label. But he became more and more interested in different religions and philosophy, numerology. And you could see that in the album titles, things like Buddha and the Chocolate Box in '74, and an album title I love, Numbers, a Pythagorean Theory Tale, 1975. Now that is a very nice title for an album. But in '78, by the time his final album, Back to Earth, was released, he'd already converted to Islam, and he was now Yusuf Islam. And the name Cat comes... He was born Stephen Dimitri Giorgio, and a girlfriend apparently once told him he had eyes like a cat. So he thought, oh, yes, I like the sound of that, so I'll be Cat Stevens, I think. And the song we're going to go for is actually what I love. I love original versions of things. And this is Cat Stevens. He wrote it, and he actually did record it. P.P. Arnold had the original single out, as it were. Rod Stewart, also well known for this. But this is the original. This is Cat Stevens with his song, The First Cut Is the Deepest.
Oh, Cat Stevens there, and the original version of The First Cut is the deepest. You're listening to me, Dave Roberts, on this side of the desk. On the other side of the desk, Mr. Derek Shelmerdine, and we're doing our monthly what happened over the years at this time of the year.
And it's all Christmassy because it's that time of the year again. And you really couldn't have a look at things going on around now without a quick look at Cliff Richard. I mean, he's one of those guys that has become very uncool over the years. Started out as one of the Fonz level cool people in the 1950s, rock and rollers, along with Tommy Steele and Billy Fury as the absolute pinnacle of British rock and roll. But his Christmas successes are absolutely unbelievable. He's had a Christmas hit in every decade since the 1950s until the 2010s. But if you look at what's happened to him over the last 4 years, you can understand why he hasn't been releasing a lot. And there's still a couple of years left, so there's still chance. And if he manages to have a hit over the next couple of Christmases, well, in fact, there's only one more Christmas, isn't there? So he needs one next Christmas, because I checked the chart this week, and certainly the one I checked, he wasn't in it. But if he gets in that'll give him a hit from the 50s right through. Absolutely
amazing,
awesome. He's had 2 Christmas number ones, and he's had 5 Christmas number 2s. Actually missed just by 1 mark on 5 of them. It all started for him with Move It in 1958, and that was when Cliff Richard was Cliff Richard and the Drifters, before they decided to avoid confusion with the American vocal group and call themselves the Shadows. And his first Christmas hit was his second UK single in 1958, High Class Baby, and they were still Cliff Richard and the Drifters at that particular time. It was in the 60s Cliff really transitioned from a rock and roll singer to a family entertainer, and very successful he was too. But if you look at the 60s, he had a bunch of hits there. In fact, he had hits simultaneously, consecutively, from 1958 to 1969. So he was in the Christmas charts in every one of the 1960s lists. And some of them included things like When the Girl in Your Arms is the Girl in Your Heart from his movie The Young Ones. 62, The Next Time Bachelor Boy from another movie, Summer Holiday. In 66, he was in pantomime at the Palladium in Cinderella, and the 66 hit In the Country comes from a pantomime, which I think is rather nice. The 68 one's notable because it was his last single with the Shadows. It was actually the end of an era, and that was Don't Forget to Catch Me. They have recorded together since, they have performed together since, but technically that was the end of Cliff Richard and the Shadows. And the last in his unbroken run came in '69 with The Eyes of a Child. For some reason, 1970s was a very lean time for Cliff, and he had 3 in 71, 73 and 76. But for some reason, the 1980s, whoa, it all started to happen again. He had 7 hit singles, and they included 1981, the wonderful Daddy's Home, made number 2. And the B-side of that was Shaking All Over. So he was obviously back to his roots, because Daddy's Own is a doo-wop cover song, a brilliant song. One of my all-time favourite doo-wop songs. 68, Mistletoe and Wine. Now, that was his first Christmas number 1. And that's got an interesting history. And absolutely in a nutshell, it comes from a musical called Scraps, which came out in 1975, and that was based on Hans Christian Andersen's Little Match Girl, and it was first performed at the Orange Tree Theatre in Richmond in December '76. Now, the original song was intended to sound like a carol sung ironically, because it was all about a poor little girl that had been thrown out in the snow by the big, bad, wicked middle classes. It was all about the haves and the have-nots. And it was adapted for TV by HTV, that was Harlock TV, the Welsh guys, in 1987. And that particular TV Christmas musical had Roger Daltrey of the same guy that has sung a song or two with the Who. And Twiggy, one of the very famous 60s models, was also in the play. In '89, he had a Christmas hit with Van Morrison, duet, Whenever God Shines His Light. And the 90s, he had 7 more hits as well. Saviour's Day in '90 gave him his second and last Christmas number 1. '94, All I Have to Do Is Dream, coupled with Miss You Nights. The A-side was a duet with Phil Everly, and '95 was another duet, this time Olivia Newton-John and Had to Be, and his Millennium Prayer, which comes in for quite a little bit of stick, in 1999. That was a Christmas number 2, but that was Double Dog. Sadly missed out on number 1, because it was actually a number 1 for 3 weeks at the time, and it had been number 1 the previous week. So if he'd hung on for another week, he'd have had 3 number 1s and 4 number 2s. And he's still there, though, in the 2000s, 1, 3, 4 and 6. In 2001, it was Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and sort of medley with What a Wonderful World, great versions. In 2006, the 21st Century Christmas. Now, that was coupled with Move It, and actually got to number 2. It was only on the charts for 3 weeks and peaked at number 2. I mean, there's an interesting achievement. But Move It's actually with Brian May, earned a bob or 2 with Queen, and he wasn't technically the original drummer. Brian Bennett, he replaced Chet Harris in the Shadows. But I thought the song we'd have, I mean, Cliff's got so many, so I thought we'd choose one from somebody else. I thought we'd choose the original version of 1981 Daddy's Home. This is the original doo-wop version from 1961, and Daddy's Home from Shep and the Limelights.
Shep and the Limelights there, and the original version of Daddy's Home. When they were singing that, and I still had Cliff Richard singing it in my head.
Yeah, yeah. It is very similar, the arrangement.
Yeah,
but it's great, I think, to hear some of those songs that have been so much covered. I mean, very, very few of those 50s doo-wop bands found any success whatsoever on this side of the Atlantic, but they influenced everything that was going on. But also Christmas, I love the novelty songs. I mean, from 1948, Spike Jones and his City Slickers, All I Want for Christmas Is Me Two Front Teeth. Absolutely superb. He's known for specialising in outlandish comedy, lots of bangs and whistles. If you ever get a chance to stream any music, check out Spike Jones. Well worth listening. And the cute characters, the Chipmunks, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer in 1960. Pinky and Perky always crop up in these Give Us a Kiss for Christmas. I remember seeing them in Liverpool in the late 50s. Absolutely amazing. Benny Hill, Christmas number 1 in 1971. Ernie, the fastest milkman in the West. Actually been around for a long time. He had a single in 1956, first hit comedy single, Gathering the Mushrooms, 1961. Of course, the Goons, I'm Walking for Christmas, backwards for Christmas, 1956. That's Milligan, Peter Sellers, Harry Seacombe and Michael Bentine. Forerunners, groundbreaking humour. That's 1956. And the Goons had started in 1951. Absolutely awesome. Grandparents always come in for lots of praise. And, of course, Clive Dunn's Grandad, written by Herbie Flowers and Kenny Pickett, founding member of the wonderful mod band The Creation. And Grandma's got a cheque from St Winifred School Choir in 1980. There's no one quite like Grandma. Another Christmas number 1. Little Jimmy Osmond, Christmas number 1 in 72. Long-haired lover from Liverpool. Interesting enough, released in the UK, released on the 9th of June 1972. And it was a Christmas number 1. Now, I'm not really sure how that worked. But, I mean, the Osmonds were having quite a lot of hits at that time. Yeah. 9 years old when he did that. And The Scaffold from 68, Lily the Pink, everybody's favourite song. Written by, it's a traditional song that's arranged by John Gorman, Mike McGear, who's Paul McCartney's brother, and Roger McGough. But it was adapted from the Ballad of Lydia Pinkham, who was a real lady who created a sort of cure-all elixir. And, of course, that's what as we'll hear, that's what the song's all about. But if you check out the backing vocals, you're hearing Elton John, Graham Nash, and Tim Rice. Interesting combination. And the bass, check out the bass line. That's your legendary Jack Bruce. And it was a Christmas number 1 in 68, The Scaffold and Lily the Pink. The Pink, the Pink, the Pink.
Lily the Pink, by The Scaffold, of course.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that for years, I must admit. But the bit I love at the end is where they go, ooh, and it just goes on and it builds up. I love that bit. I love that bit.
That is a great song. I thought we'd finish off with one or two people who didn't have quite as happy a Christmas as they might. 23rd December 64, Brian Wilson had a nervous breakdown on a flight to Houston. It marked the end of his time touring, and he was replaced on stage by Glenn Campbell, famous country singer. He was with them a short time before he was more permanently replaced by Bruce Johnson in April of 65. And Grand Funk Railroad had fallen out with their manager Terry Knight, and on the 23rd December 72 they had a gig at the Carnegie Hall, but Terry Knight turned up in the afternoon with a couple of deputies to seize the equipment as payment for what he believed was due to him. They decided that they'd allow the show to go on, and at the end he took the equipment away. Elvis abandoned his karate film, did see the light of day in 2002, Gladiators, 1974 Elvis Karate Legacy Project. 1958 6-5 Special, last ever episode, first ever pop TV show. And sadly on the 23rd December 1966, Ready Steady Go finished. That had started in 1963, and one of the people waving a fond farewell to the show was Eric Burdon. And I thought, as a nice ironic song to round off, we could have Eric Burdon from 67 with his version of Good Times.
It's Good Times indeed. Derek, that's it for the night. Only remains for me to be saying have a happy Christmas.
And to you, because I know jolly fine Christmas.
I'm going to try my hardest. How it's going to turn out, I have no idea at the moment. Things are looking pretty bleak, I must admit. And I might have to nip down to Tesco's and buy myself a tin of salmon or something like that for my Christmas dinner, or a pork pie.
Well, everything turns out for the best, in the best of all possible worlds.
Yes, well, got nothing at home, nothing at all. Never mind. I'm sure we'll get by. I'm sure we'll get by somehow. And of course, to everyone listening, have a best of Christmas as you possibly can.
Absolutely.
I think that's the best way of putting it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, if you can have a great Christmas, then great. If you can have the best Christmas you possibly can.
A Christmas to remember.
Perhaps a Christmas to remember. I won't be here next week. Guy Bellamy's sitting in on the 27th, I think it is. But taking us now up to the 11 o'clock news, a bit of Eric Burden and the good times, which I certainly hope will follow. Thanks a lot for listening. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Good night.